we talked last week about some of the things we disagree on, as far as, I guess, level of optimism, level of hope. So I was just kind of wanting to get deeper into those questions: is what is the optimal level of optimism, and what is the optimal level of hope for anybody who's trying to kind of, save the world? Because we don't want to get too doom and gloom. We don't want to get too pie in the sky. So you've got to find somewhere in the middle. Maybe it's different for every person, but I'm kind of curious on your thoughts on what is the optimal level of optimism.
Yeah, I think that's a great place to start the discussion. Well, for me personally, like I have a specific temperament that is more on the negative side, and I believe that most people differ in temperament in this sense that people who are naturally more optimistic and people who are naturally more pessimistic. I also believe that each individual person can, through what they learn through life, through experience, through encounters with other people, will probably shift like from their basic settings. Like you can have a pessimistic person who learns to become more optimistic because he meets a lot of people who actually will give him hope that things can actually be better. Or you can have a naturally more optimistic person who gets very heartbroken because they encounter something bad happening, like people who are essentially not how to say that, people who don't have their interest at heart, people who are selfish, people who won't help them, people who are very negative. So it's very personal, I think, in that way. But I think you can still talk about more general principles or general levels of pessimism or optimism, or what some people see as a third option, realism, even though that's a very problematic
Yeah.
term. So like you can I guess make arguments in general for these approaches in general, for or try to say what they are for most people, or could be or should be for most people. For me, I used to describe myself as a realist. Meaning, like I'm not optimist, I'm not pessimist, because like people would assume that I'm more pessimistic than I am. So I would say, no, I'm not a pessimist, I'm a realist, meaning that I just don't assume that everything will work out immediately. I try to have some sort of proof or evidence based opinion on whether something's possible or not, which what I think is actually the worst on pessimism, and what I toxic pessimism that I really try to avoid, is when people always assume that nothing can work, nothing can be done, that everybody is a
Mm.
bad person, because that's not constructive way. Like it's not. It's really bad way if you want to achieve anything in your life, or to even be a happy person. So that's just bad, I would say. If you're at that level of a pessimist, pessimism, like the upside of pessimism is that you can be, if you're not toxically pessimistic, that you can be pleasantly surprised. Like the downside of optimism is that you can essentially only be disappointed. So it's like if there's a
Mhm.
surprise, it will be a bad surprise. If you're a pessimist, then there's a surprise, it would be a good surprise. So if you're not like the like completely crazy optimist and completely toxic pessimist, then like those, it can be workable. And somewhere in between would be the realist. Even though I would, if somebody calls them a realist, I think I would classify them more as a pessimist, because it's just a pessimist that's trying to be constructive, I would say, meaning that
Okay.
they actually they believe that things can be done, but they won't just assume it. They look for, as much as they can, they look for evidence what can be done, and then focus on the things that they think they can prove that can be done, which is a constructive attitude.
It's interesting. You said a lot of things there. So is it safe to assume that we should try to recommend, in general, that people should try to be more optimistic, more realistic? I mean, is any one of those things better than the other? And how can people find the balance that's best for them? Like, people say I'm too optimistic. I need to be more realistic. I need to stop wasting time with these optimistic pie in the sky endeavors and focus on, family, focus on your career, stop wasting your life away. Some people will say stuff like that. And so they're trying to not maybe not discourage you, but they're trying to make sure you don't waste your time or spin your wheels, doing things that aren't gonna profit you in the long run.
I think the word that the people who are doing these things would use about what they're doing is to ground people. They would try to like ground their efforts and expectations. And it's actually it's a whole big debate about many different things, because of this is bread and butter of sort of like these like motivational speakers, and it's something that many people do a lot of stuff in, like as an area, because there's a lot of interest to like there are many potential customers for any kind of like courses or books or talks about sort of like how to achieve your dreams or how to live a happier life, and you have to always deal with these questions. I would say like there's a couple of not saying that I've definitively decided what is the best, but I can comment on a few general arguments that I think have some problems. One of them, like the argument of the realists, like the it's not like, not even an argument, is that their whole idea of realism. Like it's important to understand that realism is a fantasy. It's like it's not different from other points of view on reality. Like realism, for instance, it's very obvious if you look at realistic literature. There's like realism as a literary movement, and so they're always describing like the real problems. So you're always focusing like economic problems or political problems or essentially problems that are very mundane, and then the whole view is very conservative. But just because you're conservative, it doesn't mean that you will turn out to be true or right in the end. It's that's a big problem of like the very realistic endeavor, which is science, is that being conservative is sort of default for a scientist or like more of an old school scientist. Is that there are facts, we know the facts, and there's a burden of proof. So if there's like something new that I should believe, then you have to exhaustively prove it for me to consider it like a real possibility. The problem is that oftentimes there are things that are real that are quite crazy from the point of view of our current set of facts that we have, and especially in areas like politics, the conservative thinkers are no more able to predict where anything is headed than the crazy futuristic thinkers. You could say that if you wanted to be pessimistic, that all of them are wrong, but you can't say that the realistic camp is better at prediction for where things are headed, including predictions like in individual sense, like if any specific person is actually capable of achieving a particular dream. You can always have a conservative bias that some dreams are unlikely to be achieved by any person statistically. So you can say to all people that they're unlikely to achieve them, but of those all people that you tell that, some will be quite likely to achieve it because of their individual qualities. So the sort of like a blanket statistical conservative realism is a bit of a fantasy, in that it's just like a fantasy of people who prefer things to be mundane and boring and normal and controlled and safe. So that's like a big problem with conservatism and realism.
I see. I think I understand now. So I think the best recommendation for each person, just from hearing what you said and trying to put it in my own words, the best recommendation might be for every person to be excited about living, and to find whatever excitement they can in whatever level of optimism or pessimism or realism that they find is the most exciting to them. Maybe exciting being kind of the key word for, I guess, again, joy, happiness, all these other things. But if they're excited, if they're motivated, I guess it comes down to motivation. Motivation is maybe a better word. So if they're more motivated by being realistic to go out and do more and enjoy life more and progress more, then that's a really good thing for them. Right? Anything that kind of leads to more progress and more fulfilling lifestyles, that's probably that person's best state, right? If he's progressing and moving forward. Is that safe to say, do you think?
Yeah, because like so far I said like, so there's like a toxic pessimism where you think nothing will ever work, and that's not great because it keeps you demotivated. So I like would argue, I would agree with that. The motivation is the important aspect of the situation, and that it's individual. But then again, I'm an individualist, so I will always believe on some level that individual, or you have to solve the issue at the level of the individual, or have to be concerned about the unique attributes of the individual. That you shouldn't be making like blanket statistical arguments for what an individual should be doing. You should try to, if anything, you should try to assess or judge the individual in their individual situation and their capabilities. But there's also toxic optimism, of course. when you always believe that everything's going to work out or that your potential is unlimited. There's like the criticism of the motivational movement, the sort of modern self-help motivational movement. The main criticism of that is that on the sort of whole modern view of like the democratic Western society, that anybody can be anything if you just work hard and or if you
Yeah.
get lucky, but ultimately that nothing is out of reach. And that's also, it can be sort of keeping people down because they can feel like they are not achieving their goal, even though they're making progress. So it's like they just see some sort
Right.
of like really pie in the sky, some sort of really far off, long term, super unlikely, extreme goal, and they don't have it now. Like they're not the movie star now, but
Right.
they're sort of losing the sight of even the progress that they are actually making, or they're not happy or excited because of
Yep.
all the progress that they've actually made, just because they don't see themselves as achieving the ultimate goal. So the sort of
Okay.
healthy advice there is to be focusing on more short-term goals or like the next steps type thing for optimists.
Yeah.
So if you have like an optimist, but the optimist that's focusing on the short-term future more so than the ultimate goal, then that's also
Mm.
constructive for the type of person who is naturally optimistic. The realist then could be very productive if they do evidence-based things or take evidence-based actions, but importantly, take actions. The toxic realism is when you use it to justify not doing things or to just preventing yourself from even trying. That's
Right.
the, because usually you have to try. That's the basic requirement to find out if it's realistic, is to try, like truly realistic.
Okay.
Because if you haven't even tried, it's like the joke that like somebody's lamenting like to God that he really would like to win a lottery, but like just the God is not helping him, just can't win the lottery, and then God
Yeah.
in heaven is like, buy a ticket, just buy the ticket. So there's
I
a,
remember
for
that. Yeah.
realists that can be toxic, and of course toxic pessimists are just the most obviously toxic ones. But again, the pessimist that's constructive is a pessimist who's suspicious, but is
Mm.
not, again, not using it as an excuse to prevent themselves from doing anything. It's just that
Yeah.
they're cautious before they do things. So the things that they do are very safe and secure and well thought out. But still, like the ultimate
Okay.
is like you have to be actually doing things, whatever your philosophy is, and then it can be healthy and constructive, whatever the philosophy is. That's best for the individual. You shouldn't be forcing any individual to adopt something that's against their temperament completely, and
Right.
you should never use whatever philosophy to justify never trying or never thinking things through in the case
Yeah.
of an optimist.
So say somebody says, I don't want to save the world. I just want to save myself. Right. And they don't like to think about the big picture. They don't like to worry about the big picture at all because it's depressing and it's demotivating because they might be a little more pessimistic. Right. So they don't even want to think about it. Should we try to encourage those people to think about it a little more? Or should we say, oh, that's fine. Just do your best to make yourself better. But bear in mind that the best way to make yourself better is to have a livable world that allows you to be better, right? So
Yeah, it's the
that where
kind
do
of
you
thing like
what's the best way to draw the line there?
to save yourself. Like if you can't save yourself without saving the world, then that's the time when you have to kind of start considering trying to help to save the world also.
Yeah.
It's just I think the issue is that there are many people who believe that they will die before it will become a real problem, so
Mm.
they don't have to do anything for the selfish reasons. They don't have to
Yeah.
do anything to help, and it doesn't matter how much like they do to make it worse, because again
Yeah.
they will not feel the consequences of that's the difficult group that I guess will disappear with time, but the time is the kind of thing that we don't have that extremely a lot of. So
Yeah.
it's
I think
the like I think
you had
I would agree with you that like just laying it all out there, like how insurmountable it is and how like huge and terrible the problems are, the looming threats, if it's demotivating, then that's not helpful. It's like I feel
yeah.
like a lot of scientists in the respective fields of like environmental science or adjacent sciences uh, have gotten really demotivated when they've like realized the extent to which it is a problem or irreversible. And I think that it did, in some cases at least, it did demotivate them to the extent that they would they have done less than to try to fix it than they would have if they believed, based on the basis of the best realistic science, that there is a
Mm.
lot that people can do about it. So yeah, it can be daunting.